So, welcome back. This is the second part of our very special podcast. EOS Nation is still here. Daniel and Dennis is still here. And with me, co-hosting this portion of the show is Jimmy. He's a frequent contributor on EOS discussions and Tribe. And as well, we have John listening, chilling in as well, chipping in from time to time. So, worker proposal system. Big thing. What's going on? What's the idea? Lay it down on us.
Sure, I can take that. So yeah, the worker proposal system is a system designed to enable the distribution of funding to projects who are seeking to fund their project to benefit the EOS.io ecosystem. If you're familiar with Dash, it's pretty closely modeled after the way the Dash worker proposal or the Dash budget proposal system works. They've been doing this for, I believe, a little over 5 years, quite successfully. So we've learned a lot monitoring Dash, and big shout out to one of our ambassadors, who's his name's Felix. He's actually been heavily involved in the Dash system for a long time. So he kind of walked us through, taught us a lot about how the Dash system works. We also have a lot of experience. We were heavily involved in building the first EOS referendum system. We built the BOSS worker proposal system, and we've been monitoring all the other systems out there, and kind of took everything we've learned to try to build something better that works for the EOS mainnet.
Yeah, it was very interesting that you guys modeled it after the Dash system. I think much more closely than the Telos version. And obviously you guys have experience with the BOS worker proposal system. So explain why you guys decided to model it after Dash, and what experience did you get from both that made you go that direction instead of something like Telos worker proposal system?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with what we learned from, for example, the original worker proposal and BOSS, where it was basically token holders have a vote, and what we were seeing was very low turnout of token holders voting, and not meeting the right threshold. So the original referendum system required 15% participation of all token holders to get something to pass, which is it's important to have a high enough threshold to avoid having one large token holder be able to have all the say. But what we were finding with the referendum system is 15% was too high. It was not enough. People weren't coming close. I think the highest the highest proposal, I think, reached something like 2.5% participation. Okay. But if you make your threshold that low, then you have a huge risk of having a very one or two whales have all the say to be able to get something passed. And so what we decided to, and looking at Dash and other models and seeing the evolution of the EOS mainnet, requiring, so the way we have it on the new system we're proposing is that anyone who is a paid block producer, anyone who's meeting that 100 EOS per day threshold has a vote. So compared to Dash, it's anyone who's running a master node has a vote. Right now it takes about 55 million EOS, I believe, to reach that vote threshold. So we have a lot of voter participation out there who are voting for block producers, and they've made their decision, but they're not involved in the day-to-day, looking every month at what proposals are out there. So we thought that this was a great balance of, we're leveraging the delegated proof of stake system that already exists, that EOS is running on, that has kind of proven itself over the last 2 years since EOS has launched. The token holders have given block producers the right to vote with 15 out of 21 changes on the network. We've actually raised that threshold to requiring, giving 60 or so block producers actually having a say instead of just 15.
So I just want to, for those listening who maybe not super familiar with it, is that again, it's not just like top 21 BP that's making all the decisions. You guys are actually involving in with the standby BPs.
That's right.
As long as the proposal has a net positive 20 votes, that's
right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah. So anyone, and it's a net positive. So let's say it's a controversial proposal where there's an equal number of people voting yes to no. It's very hard to get something like that passed. You need pretty much proposals need to be pretty well, almost unanimously agreed upon from the active voters to be passed. So it's a very high threshold to get something passed, and it's starting with a pretty small. We've set a monthly budget of 25,000 EOS.
Yeah.
So you can almost look at it as a bit of an experiment. We've set a high threshold to pass in a small amount of funds. So relatively low risk to a high threshold to distribute those funds. Yeah. It's a high bar, but at the same time, we think that it's low enough that we'll actually be able to see some value being put towards some much needed projects out there that could use some funding to build those foundational tools that we'd like to see continue built on EOS.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best advantage of your EOS WPS proposal is that versus Dash is that in Dash anyone can stake and create a master node and there's nothing that you could do about it. But on EOS,
just takes 1,000 Dash, I believe, to stake to a master node. Whereas again, I mentioned earlier, you need about 55 million EOS staked to a block producer to reach that 100 EOS per day reward threshold.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and also like people can, we could vote out some of these BPs that we don't agree with how they're voting. Whereas with Dash, there's just nothing you could do about it. All you'd have to do is overstake them, I guess, would be the only option. So that's a big advantage. But the only issue that I saw with it was, it basically makes having a sock puppet BP more valuable. However, you're kind of counteracting that by reducing the honeypot, making it so that it's not profitable to future vector.
It's very difficult to mitigate someone that has access to 50 million, EOS. They're going to be there, regardless. So it's a proof of stake, delegate proof of stake. If someone has the appropriate weight to get into the standby position, well, then they deserve it. Yeah. And right now we haven't really seen any malicious intent of any standby block producers. I think we wanted to include the top 60 or at least all the top threshold, because there's a lot of great teams in the EOS ecosystem. So it doesn't matter that if you just have to be 21, we wanted to include everyone because there's a lot of different opinions, and actually we'd like to have different opinions and not just the top 21 or not just exchanges or not just indie BPs. We wanted to have the entire community, or at least the entire elected community of block producers, be eligible to have a voice, whether that voice is a no or a yes, and there's also an abstain. We just wanted to have everyone included so that it's a more balanced voting system and not just led by the top 21.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of there's like a social contract, for example, that EOS Nation is probably not going to set up like EOS Nation 2. Like maybe you have friends that would vote with you.
We don't have 50 million votes at our disposal to do that, even if we wanted to.
Let's say conceivably, if you had the means to do it, you would not do it because of
putting at risk both our position. If we had a secondary BP, we'd actually be risking our primary image, because we would destroy that. So a lot of it is that social pressure. If someone is essentially is doing those types of things, it would be very dangerous for their primary image, unless their primary image is really strong.
Yeah. And not just image, you're a stand, by creating a second BP, you're spreading yourself more thin. And again, like you mentioned, kind of putting your primary BP at risk of, right now we're in the top 21. We would be risking our position in the top 21 by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd actually like to come back to that a little bit later, because there's a little segue in there, but I don't want to tackle it right now. But yeah, there are a couple concerns with that one. But go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna segue right into it. I just want to add that before we go on, I want to add that it's really interesting that you guys designed a system to use the system fees to fund the proposals rather than the inflation, which was kind of the original design of EOS. I think again that does two things: was one, mitigate risk, and two, you're not creating inflation, at least not in the sense that inflation from printing new EOS. It's just EOS that's already sitting there, not really doing much. So I think that, to be honest, like initially when you guys proposed it, I was like, well, okay. I think the reaction of the community is like, well, are we printing more EOS? Like, are we starting the inflation train again? Like, this is not something we want. But again, with the system feeds, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, name sales. RAM trading fees probably not going to be a whole lot anymore. So that might be a problem of keeping.
And any new fees generated, by the way, are not eligible for this. So the only, I guess, a little context for everyone who might not be as familiar with the RAM fees and the name fees. Anytime you probably know that by default you can have a EOS name is 12 character. You're limited to numbers 1 to 5, and all the alphanumeric characters, but it has to be 12 characters. But you have the option of bidding for more custom names. They could be smaller. And there are by bid the fees that are generated the EOS generated from those bids have gone into an account EOS names. Similarly, when people buy RAM, there's a small fee that have accumulated into the EOS io.ram account. When Rex was launched, it was decided that any fees generated going forward from the point when Rex was launched are going into the pool for Rex token holders. But in the meantime, all of the fees that were generated prior to Rex launching were just sitting there unused. So there's about 3.5 million EOS sitting combined in these two accounts. And that is what is going to be funding the EOS WPS account. Which again, I mentioned will be 25. So on a monthly basis we've created the EOS io.wps account to hold the funds that will go towards worker proposals. And we've already funded it with 50,000, or I don't know if we executed that transaction. I know it's been approved.
Pending, yeah.
The transaction, we've created the account. We've proposed an MSIG to the top 21 block producers to seek permission to transfer the first 50,000 EOS to that pool. If we're successful in launching this system on a monthly basis, we'll just be topping it up with to make sure that there's at least that 25,000 EOS for the next month's proposal. We've got about 3.5 million EOS to play with from that existing accumulated funds, with no plans whatsoever to ever touch the new funds that are generated. Those are continuing to go into Rex. New fees generated. So anyone who has, since the creation of Rex, anyone who's bidding on a name or buying RAM, that is going towards the Rex pool. Where the only thing we're touching for the worker proposal system were the funds that were generated before Rex was launched.
And when you do put a proposal, you have to put 100 EOS fee, and that fee goes back into the.
That's right. Yeah, the 100 EOS fee we require, and really this is just to prevent spam. When you create a proposal, you pay 100 EOS fee, and that goes into that EOS worker proposal account. If the more proposals that are proposed, and let's say they don't get approved, and that potentially could accumulate more funds from those fees.
So just to clarify, that's as it stands right now without the fees, that's about probably 11 years worth of funding that could go towards the community. If my mathematics is correct, which I'm not always sure in this blockchain space, but that's about right? Just over 11 years?
Yeah, it's about right with the current configuration of 25,000 per month.
Okay. So,
and that's assuming every month we use all of the 25,000.
Right. Yeah.
So it's likely longer than that if let's say only 1 or 2 proposals get passed to 1,000 EOS each or something like that.
I just need 200 EOS for my proposal to buy Dan's cat a T-Rex costume. Unfortunately, didn't pass. So Speaking of that, yeah, so I've been playing around on JungleNet, Jungle Testnet, and the whole system seems very smooth. I think the only trouble we had in was kind of the proposal had to be reset by calling action, but that's going to be automated when the system
Yeah.
actually rolls out.
Right now we have a very quick sort of a testing turnaround. So instead of waiting for 30 days, we shorten it because all of these parameters are configurable.
Yeah.
So we have the deposit amount, the maximum allowance of 25,000 as a configuration. We have the time period as a configuration. We also have the threshold. So right now we need a 20 vote net positive threshold. That's also a parameter that we could change in the future. Let's say we see that no proposals pass for 3 months and people keep losing their 100 EOS. We could lower it to a safer threshold, or the opposite, we can increase it. So a lot of it is configurable. And right now on the Jungle testnet, we've lowered those thresholds so that we can keep testing a little bit faster. So it's 24 hours, and I think it's like 2 votes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, we just so that you can.
I actually made a bit of a mistake in my first post about it. I went off the numbers that were in the Jungle testnet, and if you go off those numbers because of the lower threshold, I forget what it was that I said that first time. You called me out on it actually, Jack.
Yeah, I think it was like
it came out to something like 50 years or something like that. And he said, something doesn't add up. So that was yeah. But
yeah. If you want to see the amount that we actually are going to be proposing when we launch, again, if you go to eoswps.io, that's pulling right directly from the smart contract, which is the kind of test settings we have in place right now. But if you go to eosnation.io to our blog, we have a post that's the EOS worker proposal user guide. Within there is a quick reference guide that kind of hits all the parameters that we intend to propose at launch. So that's the 25,000 EOS for a budget, which is for 30 days, the 100 EOS fee plus 20 votes to pass, eligible voters requiring to meet that 100 EOS per day threshold, of equal voting rate of 1 + 1 - 1 or 0 for abstained, and that fund source, which is the EOS IO names and EOS IO RAM fee accounts. That's all outlined in the quick reference guide in the values we intend to propose at launch.
So there were a couple of questions that I did have on this. So going back to what John said earlier, like one of the things that I quite like about it is the kind of the governance behind it. Like if for whatever reason it is maxed out and enough proposals get voted on to be passed and to be over the allotted number, then the proposals that have the highest vote count, in a sense, are the ones that are going to be passed, right?
That's right.
That's right. So on that line, then, would you be able to resubmit the same proposal for the next 30-day window?
You would have to pay the fee again to resubmit a proposal.
Okay.
Although anytime. Go ahead.
No, so I think you answered. So it is possible if you wanted to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second thing is, so in the case where block producers might not send the fees, sign to send the fees to the account for the next 30-day window. That was the other thing I wanted to clarify as well. Does that mean that the system is done? Is it over? Or is there an opportunity for the month following that hasn't been approved to restart the system again?
So maybe I can answer that one. So it's a very difficult situation to figure, like, what happens when there is no more funds? What happens when there is funds for this period? So how we have it designed is that, let's say for the existing month, it has enough funding, and then it closes, it pays out all the proposals. At the next month, if there's not enough funding, people cannot submit new proposals until there's enough funding, because we don't want people to create proposals and not have enough funding for that end of the month.
Right.
So we're always going to try to keep that overlapping so that we always have the excess of 25,000 for the next following month. However, if there is no longer enough funding for the next period, It will close. Everyone will get paid for their proposal. However, no active proposals can continue afterwards.
So afterwards indefinitely, or afterwards until that 30-day period is
well, until there's enough funding again to complete that period. So how we have it is that that's kind of the fail safe. The fail safe is that there's not infinite money backing this. The money is, or the funding comes from a manual process, and we're not creating tokens out of thin air to create that 25,000, because that would essentially open up that vector, the attack vector of the money is just created out of thin air. It's actually being deposited from another account. Whenever there's no more funding, the system essentially stops until the next period has enough funding to complete.
Right. Yeah, but it could always, let's say 1 month it doesn't get funded. It is possible that in the future, as long as the 15 out of 21 block producers decide to add that funding, then it will restart the system.
And there is one more mechanism that people can donate. So if you send a memo called donate, you could send funds to it. So if someone wanted to continue the worker proposal, it doesn't have to come from the MSIG top 21. If someone wanted to donate 25,000 and continue the worker proposal out of a donation, it would kickstart the WPS again.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
so there's a few mechanisms of funding.
I wonder how many people will actually do that though.
there is people that said I would like to, they wanted to have a different concept, but there is people that are willing to donate, and it also doesn't have to be 25,000 from one individual. It could be 500 here, 1,000 there, can come from the community.
Mm-hmm.
If the community thinks that the funds are being used in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
But
maybe we should draft up a proposal for a Kickstarter for a WPS in case it doesn't go through, and then we can use the funds that we get to donate to the system to.
That's a great worker proposal. Apply for funding so that more funding is available for the future in case there is no more funding. Like an insurance. It's an insurance WPS. It could. Everything is possible.
Mm-hmm. So that's the worker proposal system. If you haven't checked it out yet, go check it out. What's the URL again? Sorry, I keep forgetting.
Running on the testnet, we have a version running that you can play with at eoswps.io.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome.
So on there, again, there is an about page that walks through it, but again, that has variables in the content that is actually pulling directly from the smart contract. If you want to see the parameters that we will be proposing, you can find that on our website at eosnation.io. There's a post in our blog there.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, definitely go check it out. Submit your proposal, go test it. Again, it's on the testnet, so you could submit for cat customs or whatever it is you want. The other thing I wanted to talk about is a little bit more controversial, but I think it also on this topic of the standby BPs and the top BP has to have a role, have a vote in this worker proposal system, and there's been a lot of shakeup in the top BP rankings, and that is because Binance have recently came out to say they will start offering staking rewards. And as well as they have started voting for BPs, so for a bunch of different BPs. So one of the things, when they first announced this, Brendan Bloomer came out congratulating them. EOS Nation came out and supported them, voted for their BP. But a lot of people in the community, this was just after the aftermath of the drama that was happening on Steemit. So that understandably, the community was a little bit apprehensive. So just to give a bit of context, Justin Sun, along with Binance, the exchange, conducted a hostile takeover. That's the phrase that, again, we could argue all day long about whether this is the correct description for it, but they actually essentially took over control of the network. So a lot of people in the community is like, okay, Binance came out to say we made a mistake, they withdrew their vote, but the damage was done. So a lot of community members were very apprehensive about having Binance play such a huge part in the community. So I just want to get your guys' opinion on it. Obviously, you guys came out in support of it. So what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I think that exchanges are a huge stakeholder of the network. They're key to the success of any blockchain, the value of any token. And I think that any token holder who has their tokens within an exchange is trusting that entity, that exchange with their tokens. So that when it comes to voting, I don't see a big difference between an exchange voting with a proxy voting. Trusting your tokens with an exchange, you're actually putting even more trust. You're giving them custodianship over your tokens as well as your voting rights. Whereas a proxy, you're only giving your voting rights to that entity. So I believe that token holders who are holding their tokens on exchanges trust those entities to take proper care of their tokens, and I don't see there being any really big problem with an exchange exercising those rights. Again, as a token holder, you have the choice to not put your tokens in those exchange or to put it into a different exchange that perhaps doesn't exercise those voting rights. And something that's a key difference between what we saw between what's happening in the world of Steam and EOS is that whole ninja mine portion of the stake. There was Justin Sun's tokens that he acquired was 20% of all of the Steam tokens, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, which were ninja mined kind of prior before anyone else joined the network. And there was a kind of a understanding in the community that those wouldn't be used for voting purposes. And I think that was a big part of what upset the community. We don't have any ninja mine stake in EOS, and exchanges have been participating in voting, pretty much from the start. It's kind of status quo. I don't know if you have anything to add, Denny.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to add, exchange plays a really critical role that we cannot fulfill. And one of that is liquidity. These exchanges are not, they play a really critical role in the price of a lot of these assets, markets. Some of it right now, EOS now has a futures contracts and really complex financial tools that only the exchanges, really top tier exchanges, would be able to open up, because it requires a lot of liquidity. And even previously, we were talking about Bancor, how Bancor provides liquidity and how crucial it is for projects. Well, the same thing happens for a big top tier centralized exchange that provides liquidity. It provides access to more funding for these projects. It adds sort of reputable. If you get listed, let's say on Binance, then that means that you're a reputable project. So I think it plays a really important role. People have a really negative beef against exchanges. I think they're really essential in our environment, because if I can't trade on a centralized exchange, that actually just lowers the value of that price of that token. So they play a really critical role in the exchange of assets. So, and
the users on those exchanges are demanding a return on their investments. So this isn't just something that these exchanges are doing unilaterally. A lot of the liquidity that is sitting on exchanges is held by large token holders with large stake, who are actually, they're communicating with the heads of these exchanges saying, hey, we need to find some way to get some value from these tokens we're holding on your exchange, and participating in governance is one way they can do that.
And these exchanges have really good customer support. I don't know if you've ever sent the wrong memo or forgot a memo when you're depositing. These exchanges will really help you. They have 24-hour customer service. You pop up a little window, you talk to a representative, they verify that your identity and your account. They're providing such a great service for token holders to feel safe of owning the tokens on an exchange, that some people don't want to have the private key. They don't want to know their seed words. They trust, Binance, Bitfinex, Kraken, whoever. Some people don't want to carry a little nano or whatnot, because they don't trust themselves.
I have it, and I really use it. So just because.
Some people don't want to have that responsibility, and they want to give that responsibility to an exchange. Some people want to take care of their own crypto, which is perfectly fine. But there's a lot of people that put a lot of trust in these exchanges. But it's great now that Binance is able to reward those users. So I think their mechanism right now is if you have EOS on Binance, they'll just give you a reward. I think you opt in.
Say you want your tokens.
Yeah, you opt in. Yeah.
So I just want to get back to a point, you know, like a lot of people have a negative opinion of exchanges just because I think us, you know, who has been in the cryptocurrency space have been burned a lot by these centralized exchanges. So I think it's understandable. And, you know, even with like Bitcoin, where if in Bitcoin, you kind of lose your exchanges, you lose your money. But because of the DPoS system, like exchanges doesn't only play a financial role, they also play like a governance role. And I'm wondering, have you guys kind of reach out, like have you guys communicated with Binance? Because we actually seen them vote and a lot of Western BP got vote in, which is something I don't think has been widely publicized. You know, I think EOS Nation, EOS Canada's back up there. A bunch of Western BPs that we recognize is back on the top, you know, top standby BP or maybe in top BP. So yeah, what's the are you guys talking with them? Are you guys communicating with them? What's the deal?
Yeah, we're constantly talking to all of the top 21, the standby BPs, the exchanges out there, working towards improving the system. And, you know, and doing things like working on this worker proposal system is not something that you do in a silo. We need to get feedback from basically all of our colleagues in this space, and Binance is one of them. So yeah, we are absolutely in close communication with them, as well as the other exchanges and all the other stakeholders in this network.
And is that how you guys been able to coordinate this upgrade of the EOS VM? I know it's not in the list of topic conversation, but this is something that just happened actually.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. So we've got a Telegram, or not a Telegram, a WeChat channel going with all of the top 21 and plus others, to where we're very close. It's because it's important with something like EOS VM to coordinate pretty closely. Otherwise, you risk overloading the block producers who don't yet upgrade. So there was a lot of work months of work ahead of the upgrade to first of all make sure everyone's hardware was up to spec, and that we had kind of all the parameters set in place correctly, and kind of closely coordinated on the timing of when we did the upgrade. And yeah, that wouldn't have been nearly, if the average person looking, you probably didn't notice a hiccup. Everything kind of went pretty smoothly. And that's, really thanks to all of the engagement from all of the top 21, working so closely together to make sure that happened.
Yeah, that's all the questions from me. I think, again, it's a bit of a controversial topic, but I think, it is, I'm very thankful that you guys came on, kind of clarify your position. I think you guys been, pretty well clear in your position, through your regular communication channels, but just, for us and for our audience, I want to thank you for that. And yeah, I'm not sure if John or Jimmy have more things for EOS Nation. Any more questions?
Yeah, I believe in your answers to the previous questions, you touched upon most of the other questions that I had. So nothing in particular stands out as missing at this point in time.
Do you guys have any ideas or maybe opinions on what might be the most successful, or what would be like the ideal types of proposals?
Maybe I'll answer that by not answering it. But we're building a system for people to apply for that. And what we'd really like is to have the community sort of start these discussions and think about what type of ideas would be really good. So we were just building that first base layer. So the funding, the mechanism of approval, and then being able to publish a draft and be able to submit a proposal. It'd be really great to see different discussions and different Telegram groups to spin up and say, all right, we're going to talk about which ideas are really good. So we're really focused on building the tools to get us there, and hopefully the community together can brainstorm on what are the best ideas, because we don't want to be dictating which projects are good. There might be many different ideas, and I think that would be a really great community project to discuss different types of worker proposals. We have a few things that we'd like to see, but we don't want to be saying this is what we want, because it's a community effort, and that's why we wanted to include everybody, all the top 21, the top 60 block producers. And hopefully we can see a lot, once this WPS is launched, we can start more discussing about the proposals being deployed and not so much about the system, because the system itself is hopefully working as intended. And then we can start, that would be the next step. So we're building the tools to have that discussion in the future.
And we'll likely see, at least initially, the successful proposals probably coming from known teams who have been around the ecosystem for a long time. There's a lot of, block producers who were previously in a paid position, who are perhaps now outside of a paid position, but have previously proven themselves to, provide great services, things like history tools and stuff like that. We might, I wouldn't be surprised if we see those types of proposals, at least early on, are the ones that have the most success. But that's, pure speculation just from one guy.
Yeah, and
actually sounds like a good fit.
And they don't have to all be tech oriented or infrastructure or very code oriented. They could also be community events. So maybe every 1 year we do an EOS community event like we do, and that could be coming from that worker proposal system. But then someone needs to put in that sweat and equity, and all the work is setting up these conferences take a lot of effort. If you've went to Rio or Korea in Seoul, it's a lot of work setting up a conference. However, maybe this could also be a way to fund the team or the organizations that set up the next user conference. So it doesn't.
There's a lot of value in those conferences. The worker proposal system, a lot of it was born out of the conference in Rio. We held the unconference there, where community members from all over the world came face to face in Rio to really, that's where kind of the first draft of the design of this worker proposal was drafted.
So that brings up another question I have then. I read an article recently, and I don't want to trigger a cascade here, so I'll try to be a little bit careful with what I say. But it was looking at the differences between the BOSS worker proposal system and the EOS mainnet, or the EOS Nation worker proposal system. So one of the things that the article maybe pointed out was that obviously you guys are more familiar with it probably than most people, but they were kind of mentioning that maybe the EOS Nation, worker proposal system isn't quite as community centric as the BOSS system. And another thing that they kind of pointed out was that maybe the BOSS proposals were aimed towards benefiting BOSS, but also the EOS.io system as a whole. But it kind of sounds to me like what you guys were just saying, that's not maybe necessarily true. I mean, with this new worker proposal system, would people be able to, submit proposals that go beyond the EOS mainnet? Would it also be applicable? Not necessarily like anything that was cross-chain seems to be applicable, but would they be able to submit proposals in any avenue of what has become known as EOS.io?
Anything is possible, even beyond EOS.io, as long as you can convince the voters. In this case, it's the top 60 or so block producers that there's value there. So I would say it's not going to be submitting a proposal is not for the faint of heart. There's going to be probably a lot of work that has to go into getting the word out. You probably want to maybe just get a gauge of sentiment from block producers before going ahead and submitting a proposal, and lobbying to get them on board with what you're proposing before you kind of pull the trigger, pay that 100 EOS fee, and start waiting for those votes. Really, that should be the last step. Is you already almost have a good high level of confidence that you have that support before you submit that proposal. But like I said, it's really anything is possible.
And I wanted to touch on some of the differences with the BOSS. We were also involved in building the BOSS WPS, and one of the things that we wanted to do is reduce the complexity and have everything completely on chain. So the difference with BOSS, it was using the token holders, and it had to do a lot of sort of off-chain computation to gather the votes, because we couldn't, there was a few sort of technical issues that we couldn't hook into the system contract unless we modified the system contract. For this, for the EOS WPS, we're using the system contract tools, which is already the rank structure from the block producers. And also the payment is done on chain. So as soon as the proposal passes, the funding is secured. Where BOSS, they actually had a delay, or essentially like an off-chain manual step to release the funding. We wanted to remove any off-chain mechanism. So this one, the EOS WPS that we're proposing, is completely on-chain. Once it's deployed and funded, it has no human interaction. So if your proposal passes, you get funding, and the smart contract will pay that proposer. Where BOSS, there was a sort of slight delay of, there was a manual intervention or a manual funding mechanism that needs to happen, and it wasn't automatic. So we wanted to really make sure that if we do release funding, it's 100% automatic and all smart contract driven.
Yeah, so for the BOSS one, actually, there is a small window there where actually the proposal could be canceled before funding was delivered, right?
Yeah, and all it is because there's a little bit more, there's like an auditor, there's a little bit more pieces in the BOSS WPS, which was the design that was intended, but it made it so that there was a little bit more steps than needed, where this one actually reduced the complexity by made it really simple. You get the votes, you get your 20 plus net threshold, and we have enough funding, then it would release the funds. So we really wanted to make sure that it's 100% off chain, 100% on chain, and all smart contract driven. And the UI is only a UI that points to the smart contract. So if you actually look at the network and see what type of data that's getting fed, it's 100% on chain. And then we've actually have no server whatsoever. So there's no off-chain computation, there's no off-chain voting. It's 100% driven by the smart contract, which if anyone's built a voting tool on the smart contract, it can get really complicated. So we wanted to reduce that level of complexity so that we can achieve at least an MVP for this. And I think we've achieved something that is effective and secure. And there's a few fail safes in case it goes, if it's maliciously used, all we do is we don't fund it anymore. And the funding or the WPS essentially locks itself.
Yeah, well, I for one am pretty excited to see what comes out of this. I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see some of the proposals and what people come up with ideas for.
It's going to be really interesting. I did have one question about the UI. Does the UI require any kind of special API, or is it just a standard RPC?
Yeah, everything is pulled off the smart contract directly. So all the UI is doing is just fetching data tables. There's a few like secondary indexes so that you can query on only active proposals. But if you wanted to integrate or build your own UI, the only thing that you need to do is pull from the smart contract directly. Nothing special. It's literally just all tables, and all actions are driven by that single smart contract.
That'll make it a lot easier for third-party UIs to get set up.
For sure. And we made it also, we haven't, those features are not out yet, but we've added a way that you could, as a proposer, define, let's say you have some metadata, you have a website that talks about yourself, or maybe you want to describe yourself a little bit more so that you know a little bit more about the proposer. We've added tools so that you could put more metadata about the proposer. You can put metadata about the proposal itself. And then we also added a comment, or sort of a single comment tool that the voter and the proposer can comment after the proposal being submitted. So let's say you submit your proposal and we, EOS Nation, were like, hey, could you clarify blah, 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 blah. You can then respond on chain and not reveal your identity. You're someone somewhere else in the world, and you're not connected to Telegram or WeChat or whatnot, you can respond on chain a comment and say, oh, I forgot to add, these parameters. And then we'll present those comments on the UI. I think
that's a brand new feature, so I don't think that's live. If
maybe
you're
not there
looking
yet, but those are
right
features.
now, you're probably wondering, well, I haven't seen that, but
Yeah.
it's already in the smart contract and being worked on, being integrated into the existing UI.
Yeah, we wanted to add as much flexibility to adding as much metadata as you possibly can. So right now, the UI is showing you one version of what the WPS can be. However, you can extend that. So we've made it so that it's very flexible, so that you can extend the metadata and you can add more things that we didn't think about. So we can extend and grow the WPS very, very flexibly.
Do you think that dApps or DAX might want to grab the contract and reuse it for their own internal WPS?
Oh, for sure. And we were even thinking about Boss WPS version 2 will be using some of this code with some modifications. So
Interesting.
we've tried to make it so that you can take that, maybe instead of having the block producers as the voters, you can have it as a Boyd token holders or whatever you want. You could probably modify a few different parameters, and the smart contract is pretty, mutatable. And I've made it so that it has a lot of components that you can if you want to change who's the voter, then there's a little voting section, and then you just change the logic of the voters. So definitely we intend, that would be really ideal to have other projects take this code, modify it for their own use case, and release their own WPS, micro WPS.
Yeah.
And because all the parameters are configurable, instead of having 30 days, you could do every 5 days or every 10 days. You can also say that proposals don't expire, so that once you submit your proposal, it will just stay there indefinitely until it has the appropriate votes. You can do all sorts of things. Sky's the limit. Maybe I've given some ideas to John. I think we're going to see a Boyd WPS coming soon.
I think so too. I mean, John's an early adopter for a lot.
I can help out. We'll help out. We'll work on that one together.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Okay, and with that, let's close it up. So where do people find more about the WPS? I know I said it like 1,000 times already. Where do people find EOS Nation? Lay it down on them.
Yeah, again, go play with it. Submit your feedback to. It's eoswps.io. That's where we have it currently deployed on Jungle. You can play around with trying to submit a proposal. As long as you've got some Jungle tokens, you can publish it. You can check it out. If you submit your feedback, go to eosnation.io to learn more about EOS Nation and all the other stuff we're working on. And again, I mentioned that blog post we've got up that kind of dives into what this worker proposal is, the background behind it. So we've got a step-by-step user guide on how to submit a proposal. We've got some videos there. So there's plenty of information on our website. Telegram channel is at EOSWPS. So there's some discussion going on there if you're interested in sharing your thoughts, or talking about what types of proposals, for example, we want to see live. We'll probably be seeing lots of that kind of discussion once we are live, if assuming we are successful with this proposal. Lots of places to learn more.
Awesome. And if you're watching, I'll include all the links down below. So there's a bunch of links for you to check out. And we here at Discussion will definitely continue to cover it as the WPS system near closer to launch and then after launch. I think it's going to be very exciting. I think it's going to be a very exciting moment for EOS as a whole to finally have a way for the community to come together and work on things together and get funded. So I want to thank you again very much. Thank you very much for coming on, Daniel and Dennis. And I want to thank John and Jimmy for co-hosting this very special installment of Up for Discussion for us. And I'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Take
Thanks,
care.
Jack.
See you guys.